guy at the end of the bar is fucking Dalton, man.
Killed the guy once. Ripped his throat right out.
Roadhouse.
Released August of 1998, Blade is the movie that many people point to as the beginning of the comic book movie boom. I consider it X-Men. Some people consider it Spider-Man. They all have arguments, and they all did contribute. I think if you're looking at recognizability, the chart looks like this. Blade was sold as a Wesley Snipes action movie where he kills vampires. X-Men was the first one really sold as a comic book movie, but they went out of their way to make it less comic booky.
And it is not overly fantastic and not overly comic booky.
Spider-Man, on the other hand, fully embraced its 60s comic book roots and had its hero looking like it was torn straight from the pages of the book. X-Men had the black leather outfits that were so popular in the 90s.
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
But didn't look anything at all like the comic books they hailed from. Blade also suffered from the black leather outfits of the 90s, but it fit his character far more than the X-Men. What always bugged me is that there's a movie missing here on Marvel's rise to movie dominance that no one ever talks about. Men in Black came out a year before Blade. The actual build-up started with Men in Black as an obscure comic book movie that no one knew about, starring one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. It did well, but no one knew that it was a comic book movie unless you were a hardcore fan of the Aircell comic books before Malibu bought the rights. Then Marvel bought Malibu.
You see, everything is turning out fine.
Everything's turning out fine. With the master thinking the virgin's made the virgin think she's the master's mistress, and the mistress not knowing her son's about with his tongue hanging out.
Next came Blade, a more popular character, yet hardly a household name, sold on the fact that it starred one of the biggest action stars of the time. Then came X-Men, a movie everyone knew was based on a comic book and sold on little more. It did well, but seemed kind of ashamed of its roots. Finally came Spider-Man, a movie that embraced its roots completely and totally. These were the four that got comic book movies away from Batman and Robin.
All right, everyone, chill.
And more where it's at now.
I could do this all day.
In my opinion, X-Men was the biggest one, not in terms of success, but because it was a movie based on a comic book so popular that it would be impossible to ignore its roots. But all four movies played their role. Marvel had been developing ideas for a Blade movie for a while, originally with the idea that LL Cool J would star. As production progressed, New Line Cinema entered an agreement with Marvel to make the movie. For them, there were 3 stars that they would accept: Denzel Washington, Lawrence Fishburne, and Wesley Snipes. Screenwriter David S. Goyer thought there was no choice. Snipes was the clear pick.
I love this guy!
Wesley Snipes had previous experience with Marvel in his efforts to make a Black Panther movie, but he found he couldn't gain traction on that project. Once asked if he'd be interested in playing Blade, he signed up. The completed film had a disastrous test screening, largely attributed to the ending, where for all intents and purposes, Blade fights a giant glob of blood. With a delay of 1.5 years and massive reshoots, the film was released to theaters. With problems like that, there's no way this movie is perfect.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Karen got this new anticoagulant and puts it under the microscope.
Now look what happens when I introduce it onto a sample of vampire blood. Take a step back. The reaction's energetic.
Yes, she says to stand back, but by putting it under the microscope, she's implying he should look. Why is she fucking with Blade? Does she just hate microscopes?
Hey, I'm sorry, I just got swept away by the super good burn.
I got something to tell you. I don't know.
What? Why did they do that? Were they just showing off? What was that? Isn't this a life or death situation with all of humanity on the line? What the hell, man?
The only message in that movie is that every problem in life can be solved by kicking.
Roadhouse.
Yeah, that life.
Frost attacks Karen and Whistler in Blade's hideout. How did he find it? There's plenty of ways he could have, but the movie never bothers to establish one, which would be nice. Maybe you could argue that Frost is distracting Blade on the street so he can raid his base, except Frost shows up at the raid. So clearly there was time to travel from point A to point B without any special transport. Without an explanation, this scene comes off less as something that happens naturally in the story, and more as something that happens because the script says so.
Hey, listen, it's wonderful to see you guys, but how did you ever find us?
Oh, easy. We just read the screenplay you left us.
I know the idea is that Whistler is just such a badass, he doesn't care about one random spark. But one random spark and he's dead. And the same for Blade and Karen. Well, maybe not Blade, but he'd seriously mess Blade up. Whistler doesn't look cool when he does this. He looks stupid.
Dum 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 dum.
I saw these fools try to get around, trying to let me down.
Is he sick?
Cancer.
Whistler has cancer in this movie for no reason at all. He doesn't die from it. All it does is foreshadow his death, but in a clunky, disconnected way. Why do foreshadowing in such a crappy and lazy way?
Work, 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 work. Hello, boys. Have a good night's rest. I missed you.
I got more turns than the youth. Step in like a dead end if it's a game you can't.
The vampires get the upper hand on Blade, but that's alright because Whistler was listening in and comes in to save the day.
Catch you fuckers at a bad time?
Then with a quick explosion, he's gone, with Blade explaining,
"He can take care of himself!"
And of course, when we see Whistler, he's fine. That's just terrible. This movie is just treating Whistler like a prop. He pops up to save Blade, then vanishes without a second thought, with Blade just shrugging off the appearance. That's not a real character.
Peter, this doesn't seem safe.
Yeah, I'm afraid I might.
Everybody gets one. Tell him, Peter.
Apparently everybody gets one.
Bingo.
Deacon Frost has his plan to turn himself into a vampire god.
I'm gonna be naughty. I'm gonna be a naughty vampire god.
But his plan has another part to it.
The blood god's coming, and after tonight, you people are fucking history. He's a hurricane. An act of God. Anyone caught in his path will instantly be turned.
So, can vampires live without food? Because how can they eat without humans? If every human is a vampire, how can vampires do anything? I know these aren't traditional vampires, but they still feed off human blood, right? I've never seen them eat anything else in this movie. They had an answer to this originally, but sadly it possibly brings up more questions.
If you turn everybody into vampires, whose blood are you gonna drink?
I can keep them alive for years, producing anywhere from 10 to 15 pints of blood a day. Of course, this is just a pilot. Once the tide comes, we're gonna have to step up production.
How do you know the packaged humans won't be turned as well? Won't this make their food supply finite? These humans won't be reproducing, and this system will likely occasionally fail and destroy a human. So this humongous vampire population will only have so many humans to feed off of, and that supply of humans will slowly be dwindling? This is such an incredibly bad plan on all fronts.
The blood god's coming, and after tonight, you people are fucking history. He's a hurricane. An act of God. Anyone caught in his path will instantly be turned.
Sounds like a really crappy plan, but okay.
revolutionist, executionist, flip a triple six into 3 knives, cause a crucifix, each man holding.
So is it inside every vampire there's a second, smaller, flying, poorly rendered skeleton? Or is that just the purebloods? Or is that just a really weird part of this ceremony? Or is that just a really weird thing they threw in because reasons?
That's just fucking weird. I have no idea.
This movie has a whole outcast theme going on. Blade is on his own with no friends.
You're one of them, aren't you?
No. I'm something else.
Frost is seen as a lesser vampire amongst the vampire elite.
Falat Poscani kratko do branco, chanas kalinga pascolza.
Blade is at peace with who he is, and Frost seeks any means to be superior. Clearly, the moral is, one should learn to live with who you are rather than striving to be accepted in a world that will not accept you. Except there's one very bad line that changes this completely.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
It's a weird line that Snipes said while working on the movie, and Goyer loved, even though Snipes did not.
The genesis of that line, I was sitting in a story meeting with Wesley, and we were talking about Deacon Frost's motivation. And he said, yeah, you know, Deacon Frost, he's just one of those guys that's always trying to ice skate uphill. And I was with Peter Frankfurt, and we thought, that's a really cool phrase, we should use that. And Wesley said, no, I was just using a turn of phrase, I wasn't being serious. And we said, no, let's use that in some way. We love that line, and so that was the genesis of that line.
It changes the moral. This line says what Frost did wrong was that he sought to be greater than he was. The moral becomes, you should be satisfied where you're at, and not strive for greater. That's just terrible. All because of one incredibly poorly thought out line. The idea of being an outcast is seen in the protagonist and the antagonist. Blade is a hybrid human vampire who needs to drink blood, but also ages normally and can walk in the sunlight. Because Whistler taught him to kill vampires, it's what he does, essentially protecting people who fear and hate him.
The world you live in is just a sugar-coated topping. There is another world beneath it, the real world. And if you want to survive it, you better learn to pull the trigger.
Or at least if they knew vampires existed, they probably would. There's a chance that if Whistler didn't find Blade and vampires did, he might be able to put himself in a position of power with his daywalking ability. It's possible, but looking at how this vampire culture works, it seems more likely they'd just study him in an effort to give other vampires the ability to daywalk. He doesn't fit with either side. And speaking of vampires, we have Deacon Frost, a vampire that seems to carry quite a bit of power despite the fact that the pure-blood vampires in power see him as a mongrel. It even seems as though he may have amassed more power than the pure-bloods have.
Deke, I've been telling these bitches all about you, man. They've been dying to meet you. They're so psyched. Badass bitches. They were, I met them.
And even with that, they treat him as a second-class vampire. While Blade hides, Frost imposes himself onto a group that doesn't want him.
What have you done with Dragonetti?
Let's get down to business, shall we?
And while this movie does explore outcasts, it doesn't have a real moral lesson. It's likely any theme that comes from me trying to analyze the writings of David S. Goyer is likely unintended. Blade as a hero is interesting, as he has more of an interest in killing vampires than saving humans. The opening shows it all when we see a human stumbling into Blade, and Blade leaves him in favor of killing vampires. To reinforce this, Blade lights Quinn on fire, then leaves him when the police arrive. It would only take a second to kill him, but Quinn clearly has information that Blade wants, and Blade views Quinn's information as more valuable than the people he might harm. Because of this, Karen and Curtis fall victim to Quinn. Blade does attempt to save Karen.
She's been bitten.
Should have killed her then. Yeah, I know.
So he does care about humans, and it's clearly an issue of priorities, which he establishes even more when he uses Karen as bait.
You use me as bait?
Get over it.
His mission is to kill vampires, not save humans, so saving humans is treated as something he does if he has extra time. It is firmly established when Blade meets Frost. Frost throws a child into the street. Blade does save the girl, but not before he attempts to kill Frost. One could argue that by focusing on killing vampires, he's saving more humans, which is probably true. The vampire mythology developed for the movie is fascinating.
These are the pages from the Book of Erebus, the Vampire Bible.
But it seemed more used for cool action scenes than to actually explore anything of substance. The idea of there being born vampires is interesting, but the pureblood vampires don't do much. Frost has no problem killing them. Did he sell his plan to the guards of the purebloods, or do they just not have any guards? Dragonetti is the main pureblood that gets in Frost's business, but he essentially contributes nothing to the story. He finds Frost researching stuff, and after preening in front of him, decides to leave him be and do nothing to stop Frost.
You bore me.
I also have to ask, are there certain purebloods that are needed for the La Magra ceremony? Because they seem to kill off purebloods rather freely. Did they just kidnap a few extra for fun? David S. Goyer has worked on some of the best comic book movies ever made. He has also worked on some of the worst. What's the difference between these movies? It's the directors. Christopher Nolan can take a Goyer script and make it great. Snyder takes a Goyer script and makes garbage. So how does Blade turn out with a Goyer script? Not bad. Stephen Norrington has too small a directing resume. Sure, Blade reeks of 90s movie with its style, but it's not poorly done at all. The story doesn't have a deep message or themes, but it does have a clear story that's well told. I give it a 7 out of 10.
Roadhouse.
Ashes of their world, we'll build a better one!
Hey, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe. That helps me out a lot. And if you really love this video, consider visiting my Patreon page.